Welcome and good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to you all. This performance is dedicated to the living memory of Slobodan Dan Paich, or Dede, grandfather as he liked to be called. He was a remarkable human being who touched each of us, inspired each of us, challenged each of us, and supported each of us. And now for the performance. Moments of sharing, together in stories.
Naman puli mapeta aga silas takor Having the chance to visit Slobodan's apartment in Istanbul in December last year, I had the opportunity to meet the large and bright room in which the performances and rehearsals occurred, and especially the balcony, which is placed on the sixth floor of this building. I'm sorry, sometimes I have to cough like the women in the villages did while they were singing. So the balcony on the sixth floor turned to the open sea, and from that point, I guess it is a special point in Istanbul as a whole. From that point, I could see the infinite blue sky above and blue sea below, and clouds and sun and strong wind and seagulls, which somehow steadily kept the connection between the past, the present, and the future. And standing there, I had a strong feeling of moving through that blue infinity, or better to say, feeling of sailing through it, with all the possibilities of encounters, of questions to be posed and answers to be received when the time comes, in due course of time, that we do not know at the very moment. And that feeling, that sense on that balcony, I feel just like Slobodan Dede left us as a part of his heritage. Silas takor fogunya nagnandega one of Slobodan's favorite subjects in our discussions was the topic of Saint Lazarus songs, of the Lazarice songs from the Central Balkans. It is part of the ritual, a very old ritual, old-time ritual, followed by archaic songs that was dedicated to to provide, its function was to provide fertility for the well-being for the villages and villagers, and also as protection, probably protection from snakes, which wake up at this part of the year. It is exactly this part, it is springtime. It was Saturday 1 week before the Easter, but now we are in that period. And this ritual consisted of processions of young girls, which in some particular regions went firstly, before dawn, went to the water, to the spring. And the first song that they sang was dedicated to the water. And then on their way to the village, they sang to the meadow, to the mountain, to the river, to the animals, to the shepherd, to the man who is plugging, to the wind as well. And when they came to the village, they asked for permission to sing in front of houses. And then they sang songs for the house, for the host, for the hostess, for the children, for the elderly people, for the young bride, and also for the deceased. Slobodan has asked me to sing one of these songs on our last performance, and but I was not ready for that, and I told him I was not ready because while I was practicing this kind of singing and this genre with my group in Belgrade, we had a specific experience of feeling dizzy, having vertigo, like we had a changed state of mind. And we were a bit afraid of that, and because we were not able to control it. We were aware that we do not have tools for that. So we ceased singing such songs. We kept 1 or 2 songs on our repertory, but ceased to practice them actively. Now, an interesting thing happened while I was in Slobodan's apartment in December. I remember a photo that Burak sent us by email, a photograph of a white feather that was stuck on the glass of the window. And at one moment, while I was in the room where I was sleeping in the apartment, a white feather appeared, like from nowhere. I don't know, maybe from the jacket, maybe from the pillow, but there was no jacket there in that room and no pillow with feathers. I was feeling very, so to say, special. I was happy about that, and I brought the feather home. And now I'm going to perform a Lazarica song from South Serbia, dedicated to the feather. Pribiraj se Lazare, pribiraj. Oh, se Lazare. Zanisha se la copero, Zanisha. Oh, la copero.
This story that I'm going to tell is told to me by a mariner friend. He was not a mariner as a job, but a mariner in his soul. He always had a compass on his table and a white flag on his balcony. And just by looking at the color of the sunset, he could predict how the weather is going to be on the next day. In the distant sea, far, far in the east, at about 30 degrees south of Tropic of Cancer and approximately 900 miles away from Chipangu, was a little island, and it covered with a small range of mountains, which the tallest one was an extinct volcano. And the island's treasure were its rocks, a very fertile soil made by the lava. So it covered with the jungles and beautifully terraced fields at the bottom of the big mountain. And the inhabitants were a large commune, and almost like a family, they obeyed a strict law. They feared deeply from the sea, the source of all the evil, and they worshipped the peak of the volcano as their deity, as their god, the highest principle of their life. And among those people, a boy was born who secretly loved the sea and longed to play with it. And he had a feeling he could remain afloat on it. And for hours he watched the fallen leaves from the trees moved by the currents and the waves. And out of fallen trees and the branches he made models and set them free to the sea. And one day he started a craft, a leaf large enough so it could take his whole body into it. And the toy was hidden in the thick soft jungle. The boy returned to it whenever he could. And when he was an adolescent, the craft was completed. And after few rehearsals, the day had come. And on that day, a strange stillness and a silence fell over the island. The insects and the birds stopped their usual humming, and one could almost hear the yacht quivering air above the sand on the beach. But the villagers were unconcerned and completely disinterested on what this young man doing. The young man secretly took his craft and started his journey towards the unknown. And he was at a fair distance when the central mountain was erupted. Everything obscured with the darkness, the ashes and the lavas were thrown to the sky, and the villagers surrendered. Their deity, their god, was a volcano. And somehow, even without knowing, they offended him, which then their lives were not worth living. And the young man thought, maybe it's not the screams of the humans, but the chants of bells, but he was not sure. And one thing was sure, there was no home going back. And his craft was moving even faster by the eruption caused by the explosion. So he paddled his way towards the horizon, and seemingly it was moving even further by the time. But he paddled his way for 2 days until he didn't have any strength on his knee and on his body, which then he laid still to his craft and let the currents and waves move him wherever they might. And after 2 more days, Thursday, but finally, he saw the land. A fertile valley with the white snow-capped mountains, and on the port there were almost 200 of glorious ships decorated with the rats and dragons and snakes and friendly monsters. It was carved into red and black lacquer and lined with the gold. And on the land, someone has noticed something is moving towards them from the horizon. And when they got to it, they were neither surprised nor frightened. They took this young man to the ship, caressed his tired limbs, gave him water to drink and fruit to eat. The silken bath they gave him made the young man fall asleep immediately, and the hosts waited passionately until their guest was awakened. And when he was awake, they lowered him to a narrow boat, and with 15 sailors rowed like one. Eventually they came to the port. And on the port, there was an old man almost waiting for this young man. His whole being was so transparent, ageless yet childlike. And with a radiant smile, he welcomed the young man and said something in an unknown language. And with two sailors helping the young man, they started their journey towards the center of the city. And this circular city was built in a way all the roads were streaming into the center. And the circles were varied. The first circle was octagonal. The second circle was seven-sided. The third circle was six-sided that led to the five-sided. And the first circle was a square. And in the center of the first circle, there was a triangular base tower with a spiral open corridor that led to a square chamber. And on top, there was a golden sphere. And this slow ongoing formation led by the old men attracted the citizens one by one. They joined them. And it was becoming more and more clear that it was going to be some sort of a ritual or a rite. The whole city was following the old man, and they started to climb the stairs. And each citizen had their place to sit, and they showed a step to young man in the entrance. And the old man disappeared behind the great brass door. And all the citizens started a humming, although the young man never heard it before. Somewhere there was a similarity. His whole body was shivering in a very strange way, and he was so happy being among those people. The recognition, sweet recognition came over him, which didn't even form in his mind clearly, but suddenly the great brass door opened, and the old man stood up and began to sing the great song of joy. He was the high priest of joy, and his voice was pure and strong, touching each individuals of the citizens. And not only the citizens in the towers, his voice was amplified towards the paddy fields, towards the mountain, for all to share in it and be one with it. And when the song finished, the old man and the young man started to journey together. And the old man taught him their language, but not only the language, how to behave among his new kin, how to serve gracefully, and how to love. And one day, the old man was so old that he could hardly ever walk. And he asked the young man to follow him precisely on the next festival. And they started their journey towards the top of the tower with the whole city following. And just before the old man disappeared behind the great brass door, he showed a little secret step to the young man, which he can kneel, which the young man did. And the whole city started that beautiful humming. The young man's heart was trembling. And he could see the inner chamber through a mouth of a mask where the old man was sitting. And the old man didn't close the door completely. Somewhere there was a crack which sent a shaft of light to his face. And just minutes before the great song of joy, the old man started to cry. And the young man's heart went cold. The high priest of joy, he whom had to sing the great song of joy to regenerate all the hearts of the citizens, was crying. Terrified, he watched, but the minutes passed, and the old man stood up and sang the song just like before, with a pure and strong voice, the regeneration. And when the song finished, the young man's eyes slowly stood up and met with the sharp look of his elder. And they smiled to each other. And the young man understood only on those dark moments where the old man was taking all the suffering of his community. And only through that immense pressure and suffering, then he is able to perform the great song of joy. And there and then, the young man became the next high priest of joy, and he followed his duty precisely. His voice was strong, so strong that even one day when you're beginning to cry, if you listen to silence carefully, but ever so carefully, you might hear his words within or without calling you to understand, as told by the mariners. So the next story is The Yellow Wagon.
Christina Stromberg was the youngest granddaughter in the Stromberg family. And often she would stay at her grandmother's house when her parents went out for the evening, and she would sleep over. And she really loved being at her grandparents' house. It always smelled good, and there was just a general feeling of well-being. Grandmother always took her time doing all her chores, and she never was rushing to do anything. At night, when grandmother would tuck Christina into bed in the spare bedroom when nobody slept anymore, she would sing her to sleep, singing songs and also telling her stories. And it was very cozy. And sometimes, though, Christina would wake up in the night, she'd be scared, and she would tiptoe over to her grandparents' bed to snuggle back down for the night with them. In the morning, there was a special light that came through the curtains, and Christina loved watching her grandmother get ready for the day. Her grandmother had this special morning ritual right after getting dressed. She would open the curtains of the window to her garden. She would dust the windowsill, and she would take the picture from her bedside table of her youngest son and place it on the windowsill to look out over the garden. Christina also spent a lot of time watching her grandmother cook in the kitchen, and there was always a delicious stew or a soup cooking, and it smelled very good. And she would watch grandmother chop the herbs and the vegetables, and while they would do that, they would sing. She especially loved watching her grandmother chop the parsley very, very fine. So grandmother would put the parsley curls on the chopping board, and then she would chop it until the parsley curls would escape to the edges of the chopping board. Then grandmother would scrape it all back together in a big heap and then chop it all over again. Grandmother would do this over and over until the parsley was so fine that she was satisfied. And the smell of the fine chopped parsley hitting the stew pot at the end of the preparation of the soup was Christina's favorite smell in the entire world. So singing in the kitchen with her grandmother, Christina learned a lot of songs. But one song stuck in her mind especially. It was the song of the yellow wagon that would roll on and never stop, delivering mail to the different places on their way. But the coach passenger sings of beautiful scenes of joy, like seeing fields of green, or seeing people dance around the linden tree. And in each verse, he calls out that he would like to stop and stay a little longer, but the wagon has to roll on, the wagon has to roll on. Grandmother was always a little sad and pensive singing this song. Hoch auf dem gelben Wagen sitz ich beim Schwager vorn. Vorwärts die Rosse traben, lustig schmettert das Horn. Berge, Täler und Auen, leuchtendes Herrengold. Ich möchte so gerne noch schauen, aber der Wagen, er rollt. Ich möchte so gerne noch schauen, aber der Wagen, er rollt. Postillon in der Schenke füttert die Rosse im Flug. Schäumendes Gerstengetränke reicht mir der Wirte im Krug. Hinter den Fensterscheiben lacht ein Gesicht so hold. Ich möchte so gerne noch bleiben, aber der Wagen, er rollt. Ich möchte so gerne noch bleiben, aber der Wagen, er rollt. Flöten hör ich und Geigen, lustiges Bassgebrumm. Junges Volk in Reigen, tanzt die Linde herum, wirbelt wie Blätter im Winde, es jauchzt und es lacht und tollt. Wie gern blieb ich noch bei der Linde, aber der Wagen rollt. Ich bliebe noch gern bei der Linde, aber der Wagen rollt. Grandmother, she would never sing the last verse of the song. She said it made her just too sad. But she told Christina about the lyrics. One day, high up on the wagon, sits a skeleton instead of the coachman. Instead of a whip, he has a scythe. And instead of the horn, an hourglass. I will cry out, adieu, to all you dear ones who don't want to ride with us yet. I would have liked to stay a little longer, but the wagon rolls on, the wagon rolls on. Sitzt auf einmal ein Gerippe, hoch auf dem Wagen vorn, trägt statt der Peitsche eine Hippe, Stundenglas statt dem Horn. Ruf ich Ade, o ihr Lieben, die ihr noch bleiben wollt. Ich wäre gern selbst noch geblieben, aber der Wagen rollt. Ich wäre gern selbst noch geblieben, aber der Wagen rollt. At the end of the day, grandmother would take the picture of her youngest son back from the windowsill and set it at her bedside table.
Gaffar's endeavors.
Gaffar was in the final grade of the high school in 1933. And this school is one of the best one in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan at that time. Gaffar was excited and he was happy and he was preparing for the graduation. He went to a professional photograph studio, and there they took his photograph for the diploma. And some days later, he went there and take his photograph. Gaffar is a very easy learner, smart young man. And all his teachers like him. And he has a sense of humor. So friends like him too. Only one of them is jealous about him. The guy is a son of a high-rank official there. Gaffar was happy with the new ideas of the new regime, but his parents were not happy. In past, they were a kind of middle class, and they are merchants indeed. But 5 years or 6 years earlier, they lost their jobs because the regime arrived in Baku around 1928. They lost their jobs, they lost their summer house, they lost everything. And when the officials came with straw mattresses and take their woolen mattresses, Gaffar's parents decided to smuggle it out of the country. And they shared this idea with Gaffar and asked his help, because Gaffar is the only young man in the family. All others are old men and women and children. Gaffar accepted to help them, and he said, okay, I will help you, but I will stay here. I like this country. I like this regime. And they started to prepare themselves, and in small groups, 3 or 4 members of the family gathered and went to the border, then passed the border. And Gaffar came back to Baku, and it went on like that. Gaffar always accompanied the groups. When Gaffar farewelled the last group, he went back to Baku. Someone reported him, and he was arrested there. Maybe that jealous boy. He never learned the fact. But anyway, he was in the jail. He was in a small, very small cell indeed. The cell was completely dark. And the interrogation started, days after days, maybe nights. He has no idea how many days he lived there. In that darkness, he can touch the walls and feel the wetness, and sometimes some rats are touching him. And he can't escape them. He can't sleep there because rats seems hungry. He tried to be awake for a long time, but at last he fall asleep, and rats ate some part of his ear. In that darkness, Gaffar tried to remember the images of one of his artistry teachers, showed a catalog in the class, and in the catalog there was photographs of the unfinished sculptures of Michelangelo. Gaffar remembered those images and tried to complete them in his mind. And indeed, in the rest of all his life, when he is in trouble, he remembered those images and sculpt them to complete them. It is easy to remember, it is easy to image in his mind, in that dark cell. At the end, maybe a week or 2 weeks later, maybe a month later, the officials came and said, you're guilty. You helped your relatives to escape from the country, and you helped them, so you are exiled to Siberia for 20 years. Gaffar and hundreds of people, they put them in a train and sent to Siberia. The first couple of years were really, really difficult. Terrible indeed. There was no food. The weather is cold, very cold. And they have to work in mines. And hundreds of people are dying around Gaffar because of freezing to death or starving or illnesses. But Gaffar succeeded to leave. And after some years, he still keeps his sense of humor. And he says always to his friends, they're freezing us here and we will be young forever. After 20 years, 1950s, they allow him to go back to Baku. When he arrived to the Baku train station, 2 officials met him there, and one of them said, Gafar, you will stay in that house, in that room. You will work in that office. And this is the box from your relatives, from your family. Gafar took the box and went to his place to stay and opened it and found many letters, deeds, receipts, usual things indeed. Some of them in Russian, some of them in Ottoman language. And there are many photographs of relatives that escaped from the country. Gafar put the box under his bed and started to live in that place, in that office. Years passed, and Gafar gained the confidence again, the confidence of the authorities, and applied for a short travel to Turkey, to Istanbul, to visit his old family. And they allowed him. And Gafar sent many telegrams, letters to his relatives in Istanbul, in the cities he know they live. And he started his travel by train. When he came to Erzurum, a small city in the eastern part of Anatolia, Gaffar's elder sister Zehra and Zehra's all grandchildren, sons and daughters are waiting for him at the train station. They hug each other, they kissed each other, they chat a lot. And there, Gaffar take the box and distributed all the photographs, deeds, letters among the relatives. And Zehra's grandson, Ibrahim, was very young at that time. He was in the high school. Ibrahim took a bunch of photographs and keep it. After 2 weeks, Gafar went back to Baku. And years passed. In 90s, in late 80s, say, when the perestroika or glasnost happened in Russia, and when the Berlin Wall fell down, Gaffar's dreams also fell down. He was very old at that time, very old, and alone in Baku. And he decided to migrate to Istanbul to live together with his relatives. Maybe there are some living relatives there. He prepared himself and went to Istanbul, rent a small house where his relatives live on that street. And at that time, Ibrahim was also rent a new house. He was started to work in Istanbul and invited all relatives to a dinner to celebrate the new house. And also Gaffar was also invited because he was the oldest and respectful person in the family. Gaffar came to Ibrahim's house. Ibrahim opened the door. He entered to the dining room, and on the wall, just behind the dining table, he saw his diploma photograph and astonished. He was so astonished, and he approached with his walking stick to the photograph. He said, "Oh, look at this young man. It is me. It is me." He touched his ear and he said, "Time and the sculptor do the same job, but time is too slow."
The Harp Song.
I'm going to sing a song from the natives of the northwest coast of America, the Nootka people. This song, the Heart Song, was given to the Red Cedar Circle, a really ancient society of the northwest coast, by a member that received it about 30 years ago. Oh, 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 hey, oh, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, ooh. That is all.
Out of the blue.
It was love at first sight. The city was Venice, and the time was the early 16th century. Dakadori was the most precocious apprentice of the greatest painting master in the city of Venice. And he helped his master complete the paintings, icons of Mary and of Christ, and he prepared the pigments using a muller. He would grind them up on a slab. His favorite pigment of all to use was the European blue pigment, azurite. And whenever he ground it, he felt a special feeling. One day, the rich and powerful Duke of Ferrara commissioned his master to do a very special painting. And the master covered the back of his studio with a large curtain as he was preparing it so that nobody could see. Dakadori wondered what was going on behind the curtain. What must this project look like? And one day, the master called him to come behind the curtain. And then Dakadori understood, looking at the preparatory drawing of his master, exactly why he was working on it in secret. Because instead of a scene of religious Christian iconography, instead his master was planning a painting of pagan gods and goddesses having an elaborate feast together. And he understood why this would be a secret. The master said, Dakadori, I am ready, the drawing is done, I am ready to begin the painting. Here, take these 2 golden ducats and go down to the wharfs in the Great Canyon, the Great Canal. And there, I want you to buy the largest, strongest hemp canvas that you can find. And we'll use this and stretch together the canvas for the painting for the Duke. Well, Dakadori took the 2 gold ducats and he ran from the studio over the bridges and through the canals of Venice until he came to the Grand Canal, to where the sailmakers' workshops were. But when he got to the canal, he saw a beautiful Ottoman merchant ship with flags and streamers of many different colors flying from the masts. And he saw the merchant was about to come ashore in a small dinghy to the dock, rowed by 2 strong oarsmen. And there was a great chest in the dinghy that the merchant and the oarsmen carried on to the dock, and he saw Venetian merchants gathered around to see what the Ottoman merchant had brought from the Far East. Dakadori imagined maybe he would be bringing spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves. So he worked his way through the merchants to see what was in the chest. And the Ottoman merchant opened up the large chest and took out a small coffer. And as the other merchants gathered around, he opened the coffer, and yes, indeed, There were cinnamon and cloves and Dakadori's favorite, nutmeg, and he could smell the spices. And then one of the Venetians grabbed a small bag. It was a bladder bag tied with a leather tongue, and he started to untie it. But the Ottoman grabbed it from him and said, "Sir, I don't think you want what's in this bag. It is no spice. And even if it was, what is in here you could not afford. It is a pigment." Well, when Dakadori heard that it was a pigment, he worked his way to the merchants and he said, "Sir, might it be a cinnabar all the way from China? I am a painter and I am in need of pigments. Is that cinnabar?" And the merchant, who introduced himself as Omar to Dakadori, said, "Oh no, I do have cinnabar back in the ship's hold, but this is something far more wonderful." And he undid the leather tongue and he licked his finger and he stuck it into the bag. And then he took Dakadori's hand and with his finger, he wiped on the color of the pigment. And Dakadori looked at it. He'd never seen a color so rich, so deep. It went directly to his heart seeing this color. And he immediately said, "How much here? Here's a gold coin. I'll take that bag." And the merchant laughed and he said, "This whole bag cost more than its weight in gold, cost me more than its weight in gold. No, I'm sorry." And he said, "Well, how much can I get for a gold ducat?" And so Omar took a small spoon of the blue pigment and gave it to Dakadori, who excitedly ran all the way back to the studio with it. And immediately he got in and took the muller and started making paint with the walnut oil. Well, his master came out from the curtain and said, "Dakadori, where are the big canvases that I sent you to get? You're back so soon." And Dakadori said, "Oh, master, I found something far more wonderful. An Ottoman merchant has brought an indigo from the Far East, and it has the most wonderful color. You can use it for the painting." And the master shook his head and said, "Oh, Dakadori, you're such a fool. Indigo is far less expensive than even our azurite. And besides, the Duke would never want it for his painting because indigo fades over time. He would only want something that would last forever. Where is the canvas?" And Dakadori said, "I spent one of the gold ducats on the blue." And the master was so angry, and he came and he picked up the muller and he looked at it. And he said, holding it up to the light, "Dakadori, this is no indigo. This is ultramarine, the blue from across the sea. Quick!" And he ran back behind the curtain and brought out the whole bag of the Duke's gold, and he threw it at Dakadori and said, "Quick, go back, get as much as you can." So Dakadori ran back to the wharfs and found Omar and bought the whole bag of ultramarine blue and asked, did he have any more? And Omar said, "Oh, no, this is all I could get this time. But if you need more for your paintings, I promise you, I will return with much more." So Dakadori excitedly gave the ultramarine blue to his master, and his master planned to use it to do the final glazing of the costumes in the pagan feast. But Dakadori had finished his apprenticeship. He was skilled enough now that he became an artist of his own right, a journeyman. But before his master finished that painting, he mysteriously died, suddenly died. And The Duke came and noticed the painting was unfinished and had to select another artist to complete it. And he selected his student, Dakadori, who was now a skilled painter himself. And so Dakadori got to be the one to use the ultramarine blue and glaze in the blue on the costumes of some of the gods. He had never used a paint so wonderful and enticing before. The depth of it, the richness of it, it warmed his heart so much, and he really was entranced using it. And he used all that he had. Well, when the Duke saw the finished painting, he commissioned another one, even greater, from Dakadori, from start to finish. It would be Ariadne and Bacchus, when Bacchus first sees her, when she's longing after Theseus, who's left her on the Isle of Naxos. And Dakadori worked hard on the painting, planning it and painting it, and he put in all of the colors and forms to make that painting, to make that painting really show. And he waited for Omar to return with the blue that he loved so much. But Omar had not returned. And he went down to the wharf and he sent messengers to other wharfs to try to find Omar. But there was no sign of him, and his ship wasn't seen anywhere. Well, he went to other merchants and asked for the ultramarine blue, but nobody had it on their ship. Finally, weeks later, he found another Ottoman merchant and he asked him, "Have you heard any word of Omar?" And the merchant said, "I'm sorry. There is a rumor that Omar's ship was attacked by pirates. We haven't seen him, and I fear he was killed." And Dakadori didn't know what to do. He went back to his studio and he mixed together rose madder and azurite to try to create something like the blue he loved, but it only was the kind of grayed out violet, and it wouldn't suffice. And so he waited and waited. But Omar didn't return. And he became so depressed that he started spending the money for the painting that the Duke had given him on drink in the taverns. And still no sign of Omar. Months went by. Over a year went by. And then, one day, Dakadori had a dream. And in his dream, she came to him, dressed in a gown all of the beautiful blue. And she held him in her arms and caressed him, and his heart sang. And then she took him high, high up and lifted him into the sky. And there he saw the beautiful blue all around him. Surrounded by the blue, his heart soared. He felt a great love, a great longing. And then she left him and dropped him down, down, down he went, deep into the sea. And there he sank slowly into the waters until all he could see all around him was the beautiful blue he loved, and his heart was at peace. And when he woke from the dream, he knew what he must do. He went down to the docks, and he was so focused that he didn't even notice the strange new ship right off the dock. He filled his sleeves full of stones. He went to the edge of the dock and leapt off it into the canal. He sank down under the canal into the waters. And then, looking up, seeing only blue, his heart was finally at peace. But then he looked up and there was a splash above him in the water, and someone was swimming down, and he pulled out a knife and he cut the stones out of Dakadori's sleeves, and he carried him up to the surface again, onto the dock. And when Dakadori came to, he looked and he saw the man was Omar. And he said, Omar, I thought that your ship had been taken by pirates. I thought you were dead. And he said, yes, it is true. My ship was captured by pirates, but I survived. But tell me, what happened? Oh, it is a long story. I'll tell you some other time. I returned because I promised you your blue. And he pulled out a pouch and handed the blue, the ultramarine blue, to him, a large quantity. And Dakadori said to him, but Omar, I have spent all of the gold. I cannot pay for this color. And Omar laughed and said, it is a gift. Please take it. I have no need of your gold anymore. Dakadori was so overwhelmed with gratitude that he invited Omar to come back to his studio where he painted his portrait. And Omar told him the whole story of his journey and how he survived the pirates. And then Omar took the portrait back to Istanbul, where he retired. And with the ultramarine blue, the blue from across the sea, Dakadori was able to finish his painting. And he completed it in the year 1523, exactly 500 years ago.
Story of Elias and the Stone House.
This next story is dedicated to the victims of earthquakes of all times and geographies, and to those who do their best to help heal the wounds and save lives. The story of Elias and the Stone House began long before Elias was born. It started with an earthquake and continued with another. The first one happened around 1400 in the ancient city of Halikarnassos on the western coast of Anatolia. Earthquakes have always been frequent and mostly strong in that region, in Anatolia, because it sits on the most seismically active fault lines in the world. And the one around 1400 was actually a series of successive earthquakes, which eventually tore down the entire city. The ancient city walls, which once even resisted to the conquest of Alexander the Great, collapsed. And so was the Mindos Gate on the western part of the city. And the mausoleum, the monumental tomb of King Mausolus, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and at the time of the earthquake, the only remaining one, crashed to the ground. In fact, the city's shining days were almost at its end, because the sea pirates attacked, created havoc in the region. Maybe that's why, when the Knights of St. John came to Halikarnassos in the following years and decided to build a castle as their new base, they chose the seaside. And when they walked around the city, they came across with the ruins of the mausoleum. And they saw the marble and stone blocks scattered around the ground and carried them to fortify the walls and the towers of their castle. Hence, the heritage of the mausoleum was mixed into the heritage of the knights. From destruction, a new life emerged for the stones. And this would also be true for Elias in more than 400 years later. When the year was 1852, Elias was in his early 20s, and he was living on a small island on the Aegean Sea with his family. Their island was the closest one to Halikarnassos, and actually their family history rooted back to the city. His grandparents, when they were both very young and newlywed, they had to immigrate from Halikarnassos to this island. And at first, they felt like outsiders. Everything they did was a bit different than the islanders, although they were speaking the same mother tongue. But in time, differences melted or became less visible. And when it's the time for the third generation in the family, Elias and his siblings, they were native islanders. And Halikarnassos was a neighbor that they could see over the sea on a beautiful open summer days. And usually at nights, when they were standing in their garden, his grandparents always had a moment. His grandfather always had his final evening cigarette looking at the hills behind Halikarnassos, and his wife next to him always drank her final night coffee in silence. Grandmother's coffee had always more foam at the top and more coffee grounds at the bottom of the cup than the coffee of the neighbors, and it tasted good. And this routine, peaceful family life went on and on until one day a disaster hit the island. At the time of the disaster, Elias, his brother, and many other fishermen of the island were at sea. At first, they didn't understand what was happening, but when they got closer to the shore, they noticed that something was not quite right, because the clock tower, which was visible almost from anywhere on the island, was not in its place. Then they understood that it was a huge earthquake. And it was really huge. Almost 1/3 of the population lost their homes, their belongings, their animals, and their lives. Elias and his brother worked for long hours and maybe for days to be able to reach their family members under the rubble. Unfortunately, their youngest sister, Marmara, was the only person they could save alive. So with this huge pain on his chest, in the following weeks, when they were putting their loved ones into real or imaginary symbolic graves, Elias made a decision. He thought that there was no possibility for them to continue living on this island where everything was reminiscent of the tragedy they faced. He had to have his brother and sister and start over somewhere new, and the land of his grandparents was his obvious choice. So 3 siblings came to Halikarnassos, and when they came, they noticed that the city was very much like their own island, not just the landscape or nature, but also people, the way they look, the way they talk to each other, the things they eat. And when they walked around the city, they understood that the people living on the western part of the city were actually able to understand and speak their language. And the locals there, who saw these 3 young people coming to Halikarnassos after losing their entire family and previous life, decided to help them. They showed them an empty parcel of land which was unclaimed and promised to help them make a new house for themselves. But the real surprise came when they began to dig the ground for making foundation. Halikarnassos responded in a singular way. They saw some stones and blocks, not more than 10, maybe 12. They were different in shapes, larger, some had textures, some were gray, some were white. They were nothing like the ordinary stones they were collecting from the neighborhood. And the idea that the stones might belong to the ruins of the Halikarnassos and the Mausoleo crossed their minds. Because the spot was not far away from the mausoleum, it was 200 meters or so. So that was a moment of decision for them. They would either call the city officials, give the stone to them to be taken somewhere, maybe to the capital city or somewhere else, or they would incorporate them in the construction they were making. And Ilyas chose the second option. But he didn't do it out of greed or anything that sort of possessing precious stones from the ancient times in his house. No, on the contrary, he did it out of respect. He thought that his family and all the generations who would come after them to live in this house would be the real protectors of the stones. And the stones in return would protect their people. So with the help of 3 to 4 men at most, they placed the stones on the walls, around the corners, around the bottom corners of the walls, and around the entrance gate. And after a hard work of 2 months, with the help and support of the neighbors, they finally finished the house. And in the morning of their first night inside, all the neighbors came to celebrate the house. And the neighbor next door even brought freshly brewed coffee. With the first sip, Ilyas's eyes were filled with tears, because it was exactly the same taste of his grandmother's coffee, with a lot of foam at top and a lot of coffee grounds at the bottom of the cup. At that moment, he understood that they were truly at home.
Emina.
A few years ago in San Francisco, our dear Dede helped me learn this old song from the Mostar region of Bosnia. The lyrics are Serbian and the melody is from a Jewish Sephardic tradition. And I will just sing a few lines. Sinoć kad se vraća iz topla mama, prođo pokraj bašće staroga imama. Kad tamo u bašti u hladu jasmina, sibrikom u ruci stajaše Emina. Ja joj nazvah selam, al moga mi dina, neće ni da čuje, lijepa Emina. No u srebreni brik zahvatila vode, pa bo bašti džule zaljevati ode. S krana vjetar duknu, pa niz pleći puste, rasplete joj one pletenice guste. Zamir istako sako, zumbuli plavi, ameni sekrenu, urure tu glavi.
Throne of the Northern Star.
He was dreaming. In his dream, once again, he was a child. And he was at that same ritual when he was a child. That great shaman was making a ritual. And once again, he couldn't remember that something was missing, but he couldn't remember. He woke up, he felt he's freezing, and he put some tea on his cup and tried to heat himself. He took his drum on his hand and touched, make sound. He thought, strange. It sounds like it will be a storm, but it's sunny outside. But inside, I'm freezing. So it's strange. Since his childhood, he tried to be as great as that shaman he saw on that ritual. He traveled all around the Siberia. He met many shamans. He learned from them many things. And sometimes he discovered many things by himself. But he never thought he could be a great shaman as that he saw when he was a child. So when he came on the mid ages, he thought he can't be a shaman like that. So he settled next to a lake, which is located between 5 mountains and fed by 5 rivers. And many years, when people passing on that road, they asked them where to go or when to go. And then he started to help them. So many travelers, many herders, or just nomads, he helped them when they have to go, where they have to go, and maybe where they have to go. So in many years, people started calling him Demir Kazık, which meant Northern Star, because he was staying at the same point and telling everybody where to go. Even so, even he forgot his own name and he started calling himself Demir Kazık also. But many years passed and he became so old. And that day, somebody knocked his door and he entered Demir Kazık's yurt. Young man asks, "Is it possible that we can travel to north, Demir Kazık?" Demir Kazık couldn't answer because he couldn't be sure because it was sunny outside, but the drum says it will be a storm at north. He said, "Just stay with me with this night. I'm not sure. Tomorrow I will decide." But young man answered, "I'm not alone." So Demir Kazık said, "Okay, your company can stay with me also." So the young man said to this news to his wife, and his young wife was very happy and grateful. So she offered to cook a dinner for Demir Kazık. At night, they ate their dinner, and at dinner they didn't talk too much. After dinner, Demir Kazık thanks to them and get out from his yurt, and like every night, he sat next to a 5 stone which was his fire pit, and start looking to the sky. After a while, that young man joined him and said, "It changed a lot, right, Demirkazık?" At first, Demirkazık didn't say anything, but after a while he said, "It changed a lot. I traveled all around Siberia. I drank from every river. I smelled the air. I listened to the earth. But now everything changed. The smell of the wind, the sound of the earth. So should I be happy that I can understand that changing? Or should I be sad that I can't be helpful to the people anymore?" But something didn't change, he said. This. This stayed always with me. Under the night sky, under the stars, it was always with me. They slept that night. In the morning, the young man and woman woke up. But Demirkazık couldn't get up from his bed. The young man didn't want to bother him, but when it's afternoon, he thought he should check Demirkazık. When he sat next to him, he realized that he's sick. And when he touched his skin, he, he understood that he's fever. He was so sick. And he called his young wife and said, "Let's try to heal him, do something to make his body colder." So she tried her best. During the night, Demirkazık could open his eyes and only said, "Wait till tomorrow afternoon, and after that you can travel to north." And then he closed his eyes and continued his dream. In his dream, this time he was conducting that ritual. He wasn't a child, but he remembered which was missing and said, "Oh, that was it." So in the morning, he didn't wake up. The young man and woman thought that they have to make a special a special goodbye for him. And the young man said, we should make a sky burial because he was a great, great guy. And he built out of logs a bed, and he put that bed on 2 meter height and put Demirkazık body on that logs. And they prayed and they left. They believed that so Demirkazık can fly easily to his ancestors. When they left at afternoon, they arrived quickly to the village which they have to go. And when they arrived there, they saw that many villagers trying to rebuild their yurts, and many animals were perished. And they learned that the storm was so strong. So the villagers were very welcoming them and very happy that they are not harmed. But the young man and woman told them the bad news. And the old villagers built a great fire. And they sat next to them around it and start telling each other Demirkazık stories, how he helped them, how he saved their lives. And maybe these stories they learned, they heard from other people, many, many stories. And because the people of Siberia believed that their ancestors, after they left Earth, they fly to the Big Dipper, they thought that Demirkazık should stay on Northern Star because the Big Dipper turning around that Northern Star during the year. And because Demirkazık was a great, great, great person, because he helped thousands and thousands of people, not any of shaman can imagine, he should have the throne of the Northern Star. And they believed that maybe he was listening their stories, which about him were villagers telling, and maybe he was singing the songs which he learned from northern winds.
Companions through sounds. Wisdom Lake.
This is a story about a lake, two siblings, and a heavenly creature. Salda Lake is located in southwestern Turkey. People describe this lake as still and tranquil, mysterious and harmonious, vivid and sentient. But it is well known with its white sands, thought to have originated from planet Mars. And the turquoise water is the best complementary. People visit Salda Lake for a bit of fun, walking, picnicking, camping. There is something special in being such places, encourages people to listen not only to nature, but also to their own thoughts. It was at the beginning of this millennium, in a beautifully hot early summer day, two siblings visited Salda Lake. Younger sister Hande and older brother Görkem were their mid-40s. Görkem was a geologist. Earlier in his career, he would have impressed with the mystic reputation of Salda Lake, but over the years, somehow he lost his interest in such unworldly stories. The trip was Hande's idea. Hande was a hard-working professional. From time to time, she had been warned about the danger of exhaustion caused by her intense dedication to work. She tried, but couldn't succeed to change the way of her living. A few years ago, she bought an old minibus. Although it was her lifelong dream, and she named her minibus as Voyager, ironically, she couldn't arrange any kind of travel with this minibus. One day, her mother called Hande and said that she was worrying about Görkem. She had a feeling that she was in depression because of some problems at work. Görkem was really good at in his field, although he would strictly deny that. Over the years, he lost his confidence through a cycle of feeling underappreciated and working even harder to prove that he deserved more. Hande made a quick decision and asked Görkem to accompany her for a trip to Salda Lake and Voyager. Görkem didn't want at first, but worried about Hande to travel with an old car in such long journey, and he had to join her. It was almost noon when they arrived to Salda Lake. Hande found an empty place and parked Voyager parallel to the lake shore for the best use of its shadow. But it also helped Görkem to see the beauty of the view just after jumping out the minibus. It was such an invitation, hard to deny, ignore it. And Görkem started to walk through lakeshore. Hande followed him naturally. The white sands were sparkling and turquoise water glimmering in the sun. They walked mostly their heads down on the beach and in silence. At that moment, Hande saw a shell of an insect. It was a little weird because even she thought that it was a shell remained just after the death of an insect. It didn't make any sense because the shell was perfectly empty. She pointed out the shell to Görkem, and Görkem was surprised too because of that unusual find. It was an eccentric, gray-colored, fossil-like shell. And he noticed that they had been passing through, while they were walking on the beach, many of these shells. And at that time, he saw a brown insect exactly at the same shape and same size with the shell, crawling out of the water. And this time, he pointed out this brown insect to Hande. They had started to watch this event to find some more evidence for an explanation. The insect came out of the water first and stood still, patiently still on the white sand. It was not a coincidence that this naturally occurring event had been at that time of the day, because the sun was its highest position, and it made the time is the hottest time of the day. It helped the shell get dried, and the insect emerged out of the shell. The movement started from the head. The head stayed the same with its bulging eyes, but the rest of the body emerged from the shell. The legs replaced with the longer ones, and a taller and thinner tail just appeared before this totally different creature came out of the shell. It stood still on the white sand next to its shell. This time, they noticed that there was a tiny pair of wings on the back of this creature. Hande felt a little bit dizzy because heat of the sun, and she was impatient to see the last scene, that this creature fly off. She clasped her hands, made a noise, "Hey!" and threw a pebble near to it. All were in vain. While the sun continued beating on the wings became longer, extended further. After a quick flap of practice, a beautiful, newly born dragonfly flew away. What a stunning surprise. They felt like that, all staged for them and in a perfect timing. It was time to go back to campsite. Through the open windows of Voyager, a gentle tune of old radio relieved them, and the strong smell of their coffee stimulated. Each knew that they had something to take away from this. After a while, they looked at each other and smiled. First, Görkem said to Hande, "You are capable of giving birth to a new version of yourself." And Hande responded to Görkem, "You can only fly once your wings are dry."
No fairer land.
Ein schöner Land zu dieser Zeit, als hier das unsere weit und breit, wo wir uns finden wohl unter Linden zur Abendzeit, wo wir uns finden wohl unter Winterlinden zur Abendzeit, da haben wir so manche Stund gesessen dort in froher Rund. Wir taten singen die Lieder klingend im Eichengrund. Wir taten singen die Lieder klingend im Eichengrund. Ihr Brüder wisst, was uns vereint, ne andere Sonne hell uns scheint. In ihr wir leben, in ihr wir streben als die Gemeinde. In ihr wir leben, in ihr wir streben als die Gemeinde.
Ancient rituals.
This is about 100 years ago, during British colonial era in India. In one of the northern states, there was a village. And in this village, there was a family. The family was having a husband, a wife, a son, twin daughters, a dog, a cow, actually many cows, but one of them is favorite of everyone, not only of this family, but also the whole village. They also have a grandmother. I'll tell their name in their traditional language and translate in English for you. Husband Mohan, that means delightful. Wife Madhu, sweetest or sweet like honey. Son Shubh means auspicious. First twin Lala, that means respected. Second twin Bala means beautiful girl. The dog Baga, that means brave like a lion. A cow Gitu means singing a song. And of course, the grandmother. Her name is Pista, same like pistachio, a pista, but in their language, the meaning is direction or a path. So grandmother Pista is the mother of Madhu. But unfortunately, a few years ago, the mother of Mohan passed away and there was no wisdom holder in the family. That's why Madhu and Mohan asked the grandmother Pista, who live in a nearby village and lives alone, if she can come and live with this family. And very generously, grandmother Pista accepted this offer and she started living with the family. We'll go a little bit back in the story. Around 7 years ago, when Madhu was pregnant with twins, at the same time, in a grandmother's village, there was a cow who was also pregnant. And at the same day, when Madhu gave the birth to the twin, a cow gave birth to a baby cow at grandmother's Pista's village. But unfortunately, while giving birth, this cow passed away. Grandmother Pista took this baby cow and decided to give her to Madhu. And she told Madhu that now you have 3 daughters. And Madhu actually took care of this baby cow like her third daughter. But now after 7 years, when grandmother started living with this family, the Gitu, who's a cow, is already a 7-year-old, but she's already a grandmother. As a kid, Gitu used to run around the courtyard. She was eager to know everything. She will look for everyone. She will lick everyone. And she was very, very enthusiastic. But now after 7 years, when she's a grandmother, she's totally calm. She's so serene. Whenever the grandmother is sitting in the courtyard, she will come and sit next to the grandmother. And sometimes she will even put her face in the lap of grandmother. They enjoy the company of each other. And there's always this beautiful communication between a human grandmother and a cow grandmother. At the same time, the son Shubh, who's about 16-year-old, who also helped the family in their main business, which is agriculture and a dairy farm, he's very creative. And his creativity is telling him to do something different. But he's hardly managed to get time. And fortunately, he found that there's a neighbor who makes pottery. So he decided that he will go there and he will help him out. And instead, he will also learn how to make potteries. He went to him and then he started bringing sand for him, straining it, mixing it with water. And sometimes this generous neighbor will also hold Shub's hand and then he will put it on the wheel to give different shape. And every evening, once he finished working with him, he will give him a little pot to take home with him. One day, Shub decided that he will make one pot by himself, and he did that. However, it was not the best pot, but it was the best pot for him. It was little out of the shape, but he loved it. He went to the master and he showed to him. He said, "Master, I made this. What do you think?" He said, "It's the best pot," and then you were allowed to take it home. Shub bring that pot home, but his creativity was not satisfied yet. He really wanted to do something with this pot. He decided that he will paint it. But unfortunately, unlike today, he was not having any access to a paint shop or a paint place. So he started asking people how he can get some paint so that he can paint this bowl. First thing he found was turmeric in his mother's kitchen. The second thing, after talking to some of the wisdom holder in the community, he found out that he can soak some onion peel or onion skin in the water and get some color. And he also spoke to an elderly person who told him that he can also use a stone, which is red oxide. It is actually create red colors in the ancient time. In their local language, they used to call it geru, which means the blood of the stones or the mountains. So he had few colors, and one fair night, he found out that his mother is making kohol to put in everybody's eyes. And how she used to make kohol is to lit a candle wick, which is an earthen pot. She put the oil in it and a candle, and then she will put a plate on the top of it to collect all the carbon. That's how he got the black color. Now he had few colors to play with, and slowly he painted a beautiful bowl out of it. This time was around mid-January, which was their biggest festival in this community. And at this time, they celebrate their new year, which totally depends on the lunar cycle of the year. So they actually, in this festival, what they do is they celebrate nature and the surroundings, which includes mountains, river, birds, animals, and also the food, which they are given by the nature. So in this festival, what they do, there's a temple which is actually situated in the center of the village, and they create two different tents. One is towards the left side of the temple, which is a little bit bigger and for the big animals like horse and cattle. And there's a small tent which they create for small animal, birds, and of course for children to play with small animals. And it was the day, early in the morning, everybody get ready, and they were about to go to the temple to celebrate the first day of their new year. The Sub woke up and he decided to gift this beautiful bowl he painted to his dearest grandmother. And he gave this bowl to the grandmother as a gift on the day of New Year. Everybody was dressed very well, not only humans, but also animals. All the animals have some kind, because it's a mid-January, it's a cold month. All the animal also got a little bit of decorated pieces of sheets, which they are covered in. Some of the, like Gitu, is also covered in a beautiful pink cloth, which is also embroidered with small mirrors all across, and different embroidery of leaves and their traditional community signs or symbols. All these animals, they were also ready to go to the temple, and the first person who came out of the family was the twin daughter. They were holding the leash of Gitu. They stepped out, and all other animals, they were in a queue following the Gitu following the twins, and all rest of the human of this family, they were behind all the animals, and they reached the temple. Once they reached the temple, everybody started celebrating. The animals are also feeding themselves because there are plenty of food. Humans are playing, singing their community song, and enjoying. But at the same time, Grandmother Pista, she directly went inside the temple to the statue of the deity of that community. She prayed and she decided that she will sit inside the temple for some time. She sat in a corner towards the right side of the temple, and she decided that she will meditate here for some time. So she closed her eyes and she sat there for some time, and she was enjoying that peaceful time in the temple. After a while, she noticed that there's a family walking inside the temple towards the deity. In this family, there's a husband, wife, and a young woman who look like their daughter. These three people, they started walking towards the deity, and the father stopped few steps back, and mother and daughter started talking to the priest. While they were talking, grandmother found out and observed that this young woman is not looking fine. There is something wrong with her. She looked pale. She looked like that she's sick. But the grandmother didn't say anything. She was quietly sitting in the corner. However, the priest turned towards the grandmother and asked with a gesture if she can come. And the grandmother walked up to the priest and asked what's the matter. The priest said to the grandmother that you can see the girl is sick and she needs your help. Grandmother, being the wisdom holder, not only in this community, but also the neighborhood villages, people normally take help from the grandmother because she's the wisdom holder and also the experts in women's matter. She said, okay, we will talk about it, but not here. Let's go behind the temple in the beautiful trees. So there was a designated area for all the women to go. And this area is surrounded by beautiful trees and flowers. These three women, they went up to this area and started talking. The grandmother asked the mother, your daughter is suffering from puberty. Why didn't you tell her anything? The mother of the young woman was not very sure about it because she said when she was born, there was a plague outbreak. Her whole family passed away in plague. Even her husband's family passed away in the plague. They were adopted by the chief of the village because his family, the chief of the village, his family also passed, half of his family passed in the plague outbreak. We have no idea. We were raised in a barn. We were raised in a stable. We spend all our life with animals, with cattle. For that matter, we don't know even how to cook food. We eat whatever the leftover come from the chief's family. So I'm not very much aware about all these ancient rituals and traditions. That's why, and besides that, she's just 11-year old. So I had no idea that she will start puberty so early. And grandmother asked the young girl, why didn't you tell your mother? And the girl said, my mother used to tell me that a Prince Charming will come on a white horse and he will marry me. But a day when I see that I'm bleeding, I thought I'm turning into a hairy and a bleeding monster. Who will marry me? There'll be no Prince Charming who wants a bloody and hairy monster. And this entire thing created an enormous amount of anxiety in the girl's head. And that's why she was so pale, she stopped eating. And grandmother said, of course, she's 11-year-old, but she hit puberty early because both you and your husband are very hardworking. But no problem, we're gonna deal with it. And she invited this family to come and visit grandmother's family. After they finished their talk and few things which grandmother told the young woman, they started walking in front of the temple. While they were walking towards the temple, they saw that the grandmother's family is coming. And grandmother was holding that beautiful pot, which was given by Shubh. Grandmother decided that she will give to this young woman. She gave this pot to the young woman and introduced both the family and informed her family that this young woman will visit us. Slowly, this woman started visiting Shubh, and this young woman became good friend. Eventually, they also became the parents of 3 children. When the moon is full and future mother responds, no bleeding can stop the flow of life.
Grandfather's legacy.
و اکنون ز عشقم گریزانی غمم راز چشمم نمیخوانی از این غم چه حالم نمیدانی پس از تو نمونم برای خدا تو مرگ دلم را ببین و برو چه طوفان سردی ز شاخه غم گل هستیم را به چین و برو هستم من آن تک درختی که در پای طوفان نشسته همه شاخه های وجودش ز خشم طبیعت شکسته. Yusuf was the youngest grandson of his grandfather, who was also called by the same exact name, Yusuf. The grandfather took very special care to teach the young Yusuf everything he knew. Grandfather was a lawyer, he was a land surveyor, he loved to sing, he loved poetry. This entire story happens during 18th century in Persia. You see, the grandfather was maybe one of those unusual activists of his time who was really against the government and the regime of the Shah at that time. He would gather his friends and other people who were interested in learning and being together in a different kind of way, and would take them far, far away from their hometown, maybe a couple of days or a day away in a secret location, so they could be together and practice in a different kind of way. But as the regime was sort of locking down and starting to harass people, the grandfather felt it was unsafe for him to stay around. So he went to his best friend and said, I'm going to give you this box. It's got a few treasures inside. If I'm not back in 10 years, please gather my grandchildren around and distribute these items to them. The grandfather said a few farewells quietly, discreetly. He left in the middle of the night. No one heard from him ever again. And in 10 years, the best friend decided to gather the grandchildren around as he had promised the grandfather and start to give these items away. He pulled out the first items from the chest. To the oldest grandson, he had left amazing, beautiful jewelry and a wonderful trousseau and all these priceless things that would go to the oldest grandson's 3 daughters that would not be able to afford anything even close to this. The oldest grandson, of course, was extremely happy about this. Now, the granddaughter, the middle granddaughter, who was already married, well established, got this beautiful statue about this big of the goddess Kuan Yin. She remembered that as a kid, as a small child, she would sit in front of grandfather, and the grandfather would bring the statue of Kuan Yin, and they would play with it and clean it together and even take out the little porcelain hands, and he would put it on her little palms, and she just loved that feeling of being with the grandfather in that way. She remembered that the grandfather was really keen on Chinese thought, Chinese philosophy. She was very happy about this gift. The youngest grandson, Yusuf, got 3 keys and a lock, which did not even work. The keys were a little bit unusual. One of them at the very end was shaped like an elephant. The second one was shaped like a donkey. And the third one was a rabbit. Young Yusuf was thinking to himself, my gosh, what am I to do with these things? But he knew that the grandfather always had a reason. He always did. So he decided that he's going to tie these items to his belt buckle. And whenever he went on an adventure or even for work, he would have them with him. One winter, he was on an assignment to settle some differences about measurements of a land in the mountainous region of northwest Iran. And as he was returning on his horseback, he was going parallel to this town, which seemed to be abandoned. And what caught his eye was a door with a similar looking lock. So he decided that he's got to check this out. So he went down, tied his horse, got closer, and took out one of the keys. It was shaped like a donkey. He put that in, it didn't quite work. He took another one. This one was shaped like a rabbit. He put that one in, it immediately opened the lock. He was excited as he opened the lock and he pushed the door in. He noticed it was very dark. There was ice on the floor, on the ground. It was winter, a blizzard was coming, it was getting very cold. As much as he wanted to go in, but he was really, frankly, scared, terrified of going in, and he just wanted to get to safety. But he had a sense that something special might be happening here, that he had discovered this door, this lock. But he had to fight with all his might to get to the caravanserai so he can get some rest and take shelter from the snow. He eventually made it back home, and he remembered this town and promised himself that the next time he's in that area, he will go and try to go through that town one more time. And sure enough, he got the chance. It was more around fall time this time, around maybe about a year later. And as he was coming back from this other assignment, which was at an imam's house, a very prominent imam. And the imam had asked the young Yusuf to work on the women's quarters in the garden and to measure some land for him, and so he could expand the women's quarters. As he was doing the measurements and finishing up, he looked up and there was the most beautiful woman standing almost in front of him, watering some jasmines. She was not aware of him and neither was he aware of her, but as their eyes met, something special must have happened. Yusuf was completely blown away by this, and his heart started beating fast and he was almost out of his mind. So he went to the imam and said, "Imam, I'd like to ask your daughter's hand in marriage." The imam looked at him as though he was absolutely crazy and said, "I'm sorry, Yusuf, you're just not stable. I mean, you're a great person. You do a great job, but you don't have a stable place. I can never let my daughter be with you." Yusuf was, of course, completely heartbroken because he had never experienced a feeling like this before. And as he was coming back from the imam's house, he decided to go through this old abandoned town, this time more inside, so he could look out some more houses and see what's happening in this town. There was something very mysterious about it. As he was just about to leave the town, he noticed another door with a very similar lock that he had been carrying around his belt. So he went closer, got another key. This time the elephant went in and unlocked it. But as the door opened a little bit, it seemed like there was some obstacles. A heavy beam had fallen behind the door, so he couldn't quite get the door to open. And he would probably need the help of 3 or 4 strong men to help him push it, but he just didn't have the time and he was losing daylight. So he decided that, again, this is not the right time, but there's certainly something happening here. So he went back home to his hometown, and a few more years went by. And by this time, he was just starting to get over his heartbreak and was beginning to study the grandfather's work. The old grandfather had left plenty for him to study, plenty for him to know, to understand, to learn even more. And he became more and more intimate with his studies. And one summer, he got another assignment around the same town that he had visited before twice. And this time, on the way back, the approach was from a higher plateau where he noticed what looked to be like a Persian garden. And he zeroed and focused in on a fountain that was in the middle of this garden. He got closer, tied his horse again, went through the garden, around the fountain, And all the way in the back, there was what seemed to be a podium or a stage of some kind with a huge door and a similar lock, also a very big lock. This time, he knew which key he would have to try. It was the one that was shaped like a donkey. He put it in, immediately open. He pushed the big door open and went straight down some staircases into a big hallway where he noticed that the fountain was actually a well within a hallway and another well. And he figured that if he can just drop the bucket down from above, with the help of a few horses, he can continuously draw water and use these channels to irrigate the entire town and revive this town somehow because it had been so abandoned. And as he got closer, he was excited about this and he starts to sing again. And the echo comes back to him and he follows his own voice. And as he gets to another big hallway, he notices that there's a plaque right below the ceiling. And it says, "This is the gathering place of Yusuf and his people." And it was at that point that he realized that the grandfather had left this place so he can do whatever he wanted with it.
The Salmon Song.
This next song is also a song from the Nootka people. The salmon, as well as water and the cedar tree, is sacred to the natives of the Northwest Coast. They were mostly fishermen in the older days. So this song, very ancient, is to honor what sustains life and its cycle. Oh, 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 oh,
And that was the moment of sharing. Thank you for being with us today on this very special event for all of us. We know that it's been a long run, more than 2 hours. If you have to leave, we totally understand. But with those who want to stay, we thought that we can talk a little, chat a little, exchange ideas, comments, because this event, as you know, is for honoring the one person who got us all together in the first place, and also encouraged us to continue do our work while all the time when he was with us, and maybe afterwards taught us how to express ourselves in the best way possible for ourselves, from the person to the person. So we all thank you so much for being a part of it.
I want to share, just in case people are interested, a picture. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yes. Let's see it bigger.
But it's a drawing from a storyteller shaman from the Northwest Coast, a Nootka teacher. So we can see the canoe and the fisherman and the...
Thank you. There are constant messaging. People are typing ideas and comments. I can't read, but thank you. I guess I know what you're writing. So I think Slobodan would have said at this point, who's the bravest to end the session? So let's do it all together. And we hope to see you maybe for the next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And all of you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.